Washington again. It's pouring with rain this morning, and I don't know how long this camera will last. It's not terribly waterproof. But what I've been thinking about just now is I went to a seminar, a presentation by one of my colleagues last night called Longshore Drift, and it was about an artwork that he's making, or I guess you call it an artwork, that he's making for a site in North Wales, on the North Wales coastline. And this piece he's making with others, I think, is partly consists of a walk along the North Wales, part of the North Wales coastline near Aberystwyth and Borth. And it's called Longshore Drift because I didn't know this, but Longshore Drift is it's a natural process by which the sand and rocks and the detritus in the sea moves up a coastline. And as far as I understand it, the process works when the predominant wind is from a particular direction. So the wind is blowing the waves onto the shoreline at an angle. So the waves crash into the shoreline at an angle, but they retreat perpendicular to the coastline itself. So they come at an angle but retreat perpendicular. And what that does is it deposits whatever the waves are carrying, gets deposited on the edge of the sea, and then the waves retreat and leave that stuff behind. But because it keeps coming at an angle all the time, what tends to happen is that the detritus keeps moving up the coastline. So it forms things like sand spits, or forms particular geological or geographical features because of that, it's the action of the waves, and also causes particular erosion patterns, which can be a particular problem if it's a populated site, as indeed Borth is, and Aberystwyth. There was some really interesting information presented there, which I didn't know about. I mean, I'd never heard of Longshore Drift before, or thought about that process. And some of the details of it were quite interesting as well, I thought. I mean, apparently the processes by which objects and detritus, sand and pebbles and old Coke cans and plastic water bottles and bits of fishing tackle and so on get moved up the beach. There are 4 kinds of processes. Let me just see if I can remember what they were. There was traction, saltation, suspension, and solution. So traction is when large objects get kind of shifted bodily up the coast. Saltation is when slightly smaller objects kind of bounce along the bottom. Suspension is when granulated things like sand, I guess, but more particulate objects which are suspended in the water itself, get washed up. And obviously solution is when substances which dissolve in the water are deposited, I guess, through I don't know, whatever processes that would be. So there's all these processes that work that within Longshore Drift and within tidal processes and wave processes generally, which are incredibly complex, it seems to me, and do all sorts of, have this incredibly, complex effect on the geography of the coastlines, which I guess I'm thinking of in terms of the kind of intelligence at work. Not a conscious intelligence or anything like that. I'm certainly not invoking any kind of intentionality to this process. But given the complexity of it, I guess I'm just kind of thinking of it as, in terms of intelligence, it's doing something which would be regarded as intelligent if a human being did it, or if an animal did it. The second thing that falls out of that for me is in relation to something that I think Coomaraswami said. It's years ago since I've read any Coomaraswami, but I'm pretty sure that Coomaraswami said something like art. He was talking about art. He said art should imitate nature, not in its appearance, but in its manner of operation. I don't think I got that quotation quite right, because it's at least 20 years ago already. But art should imitate nature, not in its appearance, but in its manner of operation. Now, obviously, that's a bit prescriptive. I don't think that the should word is particularly relevant in there. But the idea that something can be learned about artistic and creative processes by looking at the processes that nature undergoes, its manner of operation, I think is interesting. And in relation to Longshore Drift, obviously there are very particular processes at work there that could be thought about, particularly that quartet of processes, traction, saltation, suspension and solution, but also the kind of very simple interventions into that process that can be made, which have huge effect. Like on the coastline of both and Aberystwyth and most coastlines, you get these things called groynes, which are, I think they're designed to actually to alleviate the effects of longshore drift. They're kind of fences, very firmly fixed fences which lead out into the ocean or lead out into the sea, so that as the waves come across it kind of breaks the waves so they don't wash huge amounts of material up the coastline at this strange angle. But what happens when those groynes are built is you get very particular patterns of deposition of the objects and the pebbles and the sand and so on. It tends to be built up at one side of the groyne and not built up at the other. You also get gradations in the kind of objects. So the kind of striations you get in the coast on the beach, a line of seaweed, a line of shells, a line of particular sized pebbles, seems to naturally kind of filter itself according to the weight or the buoyancy or whatever it is of that type of object. So this very simple intervention of just building a wall out into the ocean, a groyne, itself creates, is enough to kind of mobilize the intelligence of that system and to mobilize those processes to create something very, very interesting and different and effective. And I think in terms of art processes, and in relation to my colleague Simon, who was doing this presentation last night, his processes I think are quite like that. I really like his work, and one of the things I like about it is it tends to work like groyne. I probably won't mind saying that, but for me they seem to work like kind of interventions into an existing system, which just changes it slightly or just intrudes upon that system enough for the intelligence that's already in the system, the complexity, the systematic processing of material that's already in there, and which is largely invisible, to sort of curve itself around the intervention and produce something either evocative or politically interesting or just beautiful, really. Yeah, it's so wet here in Glasgow today. When it's a nice day, it's beautiful here. When it's like this, actually it's still beautiful, but it's very, very wet indeed. Although, actually, where I'm standing right now, I've got a lot of magnolia bushes near me. So in addition to this being covered in rain, I'm also kind of overwhelmed with this really strong smell of magnolia blossom.